This is a presentation on coping with moral injury for the iReach program.
First, a quick acknowledgement that this project was supported by the Health Resources and Services Administration of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and a disclaimer that the contents of this presentation and myself do not necessarily represent the official views of, nor an endorsement by, HRSA, HHS, the Department of Veterans Affairs, or the U.S. government.
For this presentation on coping with moral injury, there are 3 learning objectives. So hopefully by the time you finish this presentation, you'll be able to first define what moral injury is, second, understand the different symptoms and struggles that are linked with moral injury and people who are suffering from moral injury, and third, identify potential options for support or treatment of moral injury distress. Okay, so first, what is moral injury? Moral injury can occur when someone is exposed to a potentially morally injurious event. And a potentially morally injurious event is broadly defined as some kind of act that either a person perpetrated or committed themselves, or they witnessed another person do this act that violates their own personal values and moral code. So this type of event can be split, broken down into 2 broad categories of self-harms and other related harms. Self-harms refer to those acts that the person committed themselves, something that they did or failed to do themselves. And so here is an example, here's a list of a few examples of events that might fall under this category that veterans in particular are at risk of exposure to during combat or during deployment. So things like prescribed or proscribed violence and killing, collateral killing, accidental killing of people who weren't intended to be killed, maiming, destruction, high stakes, cruel betrayal of others. As I mentioned before, sometimes it's not just the commission of acts that violate these values, but also the omission or the failure to meet certain responsibilities. So maybe this could be like a mistake that somebody made that hurt other people, or a failure to save someone's life or protect others. So all of those are examples of self-harms. And then other related harms where you or a person has witnessed a transgressive act can be described as witnessing grave inhumanity or suffering, witnessing somebody participate in that kind of suffering or cause that suffering, in addition to high stakes levels of betrayal within people that you trusted, or whether that's trusted people or leaders or the entire system itself, maybe the military or maybe the unit or the branch or something like that, or even just feeling like you have been victimized by people that you trusted, and that can also be perceived as a potentially morally injurious event. So when someone is exposed to a potentially morally injurious event, sometimes this can lead to moral injury and the symptoms and consequences that are associated with that, which include, a series of intense and impairing emotions, beliefs, and social behaviors, all of which can have a significant impact on someone's daily life and functioning. And so here's a list of some of those symptoms, and maybe out the gate it's important to note that there is a lot of overlap between these kind of symptoms that you would see with moral injury and the symptoms that you might see with PTSD following a exposure to a traumatic event. So on the surface level, there is some overlap, but the differences between some of these symptoms and PTSD symptoms will be the content of the actual symptom, or maybe the specificity or the nature of some of these symptoms might be slightly different and require, in some cases require some additional work or alternative approaches, because of at the core of these symptoms is the violation or sense of violation of one's own moral code and personal values. So first, some of the intense emotions: hostility and anger, guilt and shame. Hostility and anger can be particularly prominent if it's an other-related harm. So anger at the fact that this transgressive act was committed by another person, or upon you or upon someone. But then also the guilt and shame if you were the person who actually committed that act or failed to do something you felt like you should have done. Reduced interest in things previously enjoyed, so kind of lacking those positive emotions, but also lacking enjoyment that you used to get out of activities that were important to you. Strong negative beliefs about self, others, in the world, and maybe the things that fall more in line with moral injury specifically is changes in beliefs of your own goodness or your capacity for goodness because of things that you saw or things that you did, but also a sense of losing one's purpose or significant changes in religious or spiritual beliefs, which may look something like, my salvation is in jeopardy, or I'm doomed to be sent to hell because of what I did or what I saw, or something like that. And then on the social behaviors, isolation and loneliness is a strong component, and just avoidance, general avoidance, and avoidance from community, avoidance from people that you loved, or avoidance of things that might trigger or remind someone of the morally injurious event. Okay, now for seeking support for moral injury or treatment for moral injury. There are several different options that can be available. So on the treatment side of things, in terms of seeking out a treatment option that involves a therapist or a team of therapists that you would work with to address these issues, the first kind of set of treatment options that are available are trauma-focused PTSD treatments. So basically things that have been used to target PTSD specifically, and in the case in which someone was exposed to a traumatic event. These treatments have shown promise for certain folks who are suffering from moral injury, and those include things like prolonged exposure, cognitive processing therapy. So those types of treatments are most widely available within VA clinics, and they can help people who are struggling with moral injury. So that is one potential option. Another kind of therapy that has been used to address a whole wide range of concerns is acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT. And ACT isn't designed to target moral injury specifically, but more and more people are using ACT for moral injury and exploring it on the research side to see how effective it can be. So that is another option that might be available that could, address some of these concerns. And then after that, the other set of treatment options that are listed here involve other kinds of treatments that have been developed to specifically target moral injury and maybe take into consideration the unique differences between someone who has been exposed to a morally injurious event versus someone who has been exposed to just a traumatic event, and trying to help veterans who are struggling with the moral side of things, the struggles that come with either witnessing or being involved with the violation of your own personal values. So these treatments include adaptive disclosure, impact of killing intervention, trauma-informed guilt reduction therapy, and building spiritual strength. So those are different treatment options that may not be available at every single VA center or clinic, but they do exist and are trying to be implemented more broadly as we speak. In addition to just general treatment or structured treatment, if someone it's just looking for ways to cope and trying to just feel better or get by. The research in this area is still growing, but one just very basic thing to think about that may help is thinking about how you may rebalance the badness with more goodness in your life. And this might look like, if you perceive yourself to be the source of significant badness or bad behavior or bad outcomes that are a result of your actions, well, what would it look like to be the source of goodness or good outcomes or putting good into the world? What would that look like? If someone is struggling with the other related harms aspect of moral injury and sense of betrayal and distrust in others, the same principle applies, but you might consider, well, what would it look like to surround myself with people who feel more connected to goodness or feel more connected to the positive aspects of humanity. So that's one thing that you could potentially, or loved ones could potentially explore if you're not able to seek treatment or if you're not ready to seek treatment at this time.
Thank you very much for listening to this presentation. Please feel free to check out all the other presentations and modules of the iReach program along with the fact sheets. There is one fact sheet linked with each presentation, which also includes additional resources and suggestions. Thank you again.